The biggest retirement mistake isn't running out of money. It's continuing to live in fear after you're already secure. You spent decades learning how to avoid retirement mistakes, studying retirement planning, adjusting investments, avoiding 401k mistakes, and building your retirement savings with discipline. You treated investing for retirement almost like a moral code. You protected the future with rigor. You built a solid foundation, reinforced by Social Security and careful planning. The problem is that the fear that served you at 30 can limit you at 70. There comes a quiet moment when the question, "Will I run out of money?" stops being prudent and starts becoming outdated. Almost no one recognizes when that moment arrives. And that's exactly why so many people reach financial freedom on paper, yet continue living as if they're still trying to survive. In this video, you'll understand why most people learn how to retire financially, but never learn when to change the function of money. And in Topic 9, the shift that changes everything, it will become clear which question should replace the traditional fear. A question that completely redefines what security actually means, because misinterpreted security can become a sophisticated form of waste. The fear you think you have, but probably don't. You believe your greatest fear in retirement is running out of money. That's the dominant narrative in almost every retirement tip and nearly all traditional retirement planning. You spent decades avoiding retirement mistakes, maximizing your 401k, studying investing for retirement, tracking the market, and trying to understand how to retire safely. It's natural that your mind has been trained to protect your assets. The problem is that often the fear you keep repeating isn't the one that truly threatens your life. And that difference changes everything. If you pause for a moment and look at the numbers objectively, you may notice something interesting. You have guaranteed Social Security, maybe a pension, perhaps retirement savings above your generation's average. Your home may be paid off. You've already passed the most financially vulnerable stage of life. And yet, the feeling of risk remains, as if you were one step away from financial collapse. The honest question isn't, what if I run out of money? But why do I still feel in danger? Imagine a 68-year-old retiree with $1.4 million invested, a paid-off home, and Social Security covering a large portion of basic expenses. He follows all the classic retirement planning principles, avoids 401k mistakes, and maintains a conservative allocation. Technically, he's well positioned for financial freedom. Yet, he hesitates to take a trip he's planned for years because he's afraid of touching too much of his retirement saving. The fear isn't rational, it's automatic. Can you recognize yourself, even slightly, in that hesitation? For decades, your brain associated prudence with survival. The more you saved, the safer you felt. That logic worked perfectly during the accumulation phase, especially if you dreamed of retiring early, or at least avoiding dependence solely on Social Security. The effort to avoid retirement mistakes was essential. But now the context has changed, and you may be applying a wartime strategy in a time of peace, and that begins to create a silent tension. The fear of running out of money is concrete and measurable. It appears in spreadsheets, but there's a less visible fear that doesn't show up in investing for retirement simulations or traditional how-to-retire calculations. It doesn't appear in charts, it doesn't surface in quarterly reports, and it's rarely discussed in popular retirement tips. And interestingly, it starts gaining strength exactly when the first fear is no longer dominant. That transition is what we need to talk about now. The 30-year-old version of you had the right fear. When you were 30, the fear made sense. Income was unstable, the kids were young, and your career was still being built. Maybe you were paying a mortgage, financing a car, trying to understand investing for retirement while juggling monthly bills. At that stage, making retirement mistakes could cost you decades of recovery. The fear of not having enough money was legitimate. It was strategic, almost necessary for your financial survival. Back then, every contribution to your 401k represented real progress. Avoiding 401k mistakes was a concrete priority. You studied retirement tips, compared funds, thought about how to retire safely, even if retirement still felt far away. The risks were tangible: losing your job, facing an economic crisis, dealing with an unexpected medical expense. Fear functioned as a healthy alarm system. It kept you disciplined, focused, and prudent. Think of someone who is 32 years old, with 2 young children and $40,000 invested. That person needs to protect every dollar. They need to prioritize retirement savings, maintain liquidity, and plan ahead. If they neglect retirement planning, the consequences could be severe. In that context, fear is a mechanism of responsibility. It prevents impulsive decisions and reinforces consistent investing for retirement habits. At 30, fearing that money might run out was a sign of maturity, but what is appropriate at 30 can become excessive at 70. The human mind rarely updates its emotional systems at the same pace it updates its net worth. You evolve financially, but your instincts remain anchored in the past. It's like driving on an empty highway with the same level of tension you had when you were first learning to drive in heavy city traffic. Your skills improved, the environment changed, but the fear was never recalibrated. The key question isn't whether the fear was wrong in the beginning. It was useful, maybe indispensable. The question is whether you recognized when it stopped being proportional to your current reality. Because when life changes and fear remains the same, something becomes misaligned. And that misalignment is what leads us to the next point, where the problem starts to reveal itself more clearly. The problem: you never updated the fear. There's a silent difference between growing financially and evolving emotionally. You may have executed excellent retirement planning, avoided retirement mistakes for decades, built consistent retirement savings, and learned how to retire early with discipline. But that doesn't mean your perception of risk evolved along with your numbers. Wealth grows numerically, fear grows quietly, and often it remains frozen in the past. Look at what has happened to you over time. Your income increased, your investments matured. Your 401k went from a modest monthly contribution to a solid structure. You studied investing for retirement, adjusted your allocation, reduced 401k mistakes, and followed retirement tips carefully. Yet internally, you may still react like someone who needs to protect every dollar at any cost. The logic changed. The reaction didn't. This disconnect is more common than people realize, but it's rarely discussed. You continue operating under a scarcity-based mental model, even though your numbers reflect stability. It's as if you upgraded your financial software, but kept the same emotional operating system. The consequence is subtle. You avoid spending even when you can afford to, postpone decisions even when they make sense, and maintain a level of caution that no longer matches your current stage of financial freedom. Imagine two retirees with similar portfolios and Social Security covering much of their essential expenses. One recognizes that the primary risk has shifted and begins prioritizing experiences, health, and time with family. The other keeps accumulating, as if still trying to prove something to the future. Both executed solid retirement planning, but only one updated the fear. The other remains attached to an older version of himself, and this is where the transition becomes dangerous. When you carry the same fear into a different stage of life, it stops being protection and starts becoming limitation. This shift doesn't happen dramatically. It's slow, almost imperceptible. And in the next point, you'll see how the caution that once served you well can quietly begin to transform into something else. If this video is making you slightly uncomfortable, don't ignore that. Most people close the video the moment they start recognizing themselves in the mistake. If you want to keep confronting this kind of discomfort, instead of returning to comfortable content that simply confirms what you already believe, then subscribe now. It's not about following the channel. It's about choosing clarity over artificial comfort. And use the like button as a personal marker, a public reminder that you won't protect money at the expense of your own life. When safety turns into paralysis. There comes a point when safety stops being protection and starts turning into paralysis. You spent decades avoiding retirement mistakes, structuring your retirement planning carefully, and approaching investing for retirement with near military discipline. That behavior is what built your retirement savings and may have even brought you to financial freedom earlier than expected. But what happens when the pursuit of safety continues even after you are already secure? The transition is subtle. First, you cut non-essential spending. Then, you postpone planned trips. Next, you decide it's still not the right time to use part of your portfolio. Each individual decision seems prudent, even aligned with solid retirement tips. But when repeated over years, they form a pattern. You begin protecting the money more than you protect your time. And that quietly alters the function of your wealth. Consider the difference between control and rigidity. Control means consciously deciding when to spend and when to save. Rigidity means feeling automatic discomfort every time your balance decreases, even if your plan allows for it. You may have avoided 401k mistakes for decades, but the risk now isn't technical. It's psychological. You're no longer just managing money. You're trying to preserve a sense of safety that has already been achieved, and that can limit your choices more than any market downturn. Imagine your plan supports a sustainable 3% withdrawal rate per year. Technically, it's solid. Social Security covers a portion of your fixed expenses. Your portfolio is well diversified, and yet you avoid even withdrawing 2% because you fear that something unexpected might happen. This is where safety begins to morph into immobility. Not because the numbers indicate danger, but because the fear was never recalibrated alongside them. The central issue isn't whether you should be prudent. Prudence remains a virtue. The problem arises when prudence prevents you from acting within the boundaries your own retirement planning allows. When that happens, you stop using money as a tool and begin serving it as if you were still in accumulation mode. And this inversion becomes even more evident when we look at what truly changes at age 70. The invisible shift at 70. There's a silent shift that almost no traditional retirement planning framework highlights clearly. At 30, money was the scarce resource. At 70, money often stops being the scarce resource. Time becomes the scarce one. This transition doesn't show up in investing for retirement spreadsheets, doesn't appear in Social Security projections, and is rarely mentioned in popular retirement tips. Yet, it completely redefines how you should evaluate risk. When you were 30, losing money was a concrete threat. You had decades to work, but also decades of expenses ahead. Now, at 70, your portfolio may be stable, your retirement savings consolidated, and most major retirement mistakes already avoided. The risk of financial collapse may be lower than it has ever been. Yet the window for physical experiences, long trips, adventures with grandchildren, or personal projects begins to narrow in a natural, biological way. Picture two imaginary lines. The first represents your net worth over time. It grows, stabilizes, perhaps fluctuates, but it remains present. The second represents energy, mobility, and physical capacity. That second line doesn't rise in the same pattern. It gradually declines. Most people spend decades learning how to retire financially, but very few learned how to manage that second line. And that line quietly begins to dictate the real limit. Suppose you have the financial resources to take an international trip that involves long walks, extended travel days, and a certain level of stamina. Financially, it's feasible. Your retirement planning allows it. Social Security covers your base expenses. Yet you postpone it for 5 more years, waiting for the perfect time. What rarely gets calculated is that physical capacity may not wait at the same pace as the markets. There is a window that closes quietly, and it doesn't send reminders. Here's the great inversion. At 30, you needed to protect money to buy time in the future. At 70, you need to use money to protect the time you still have. If that logic isn't internalized, you'll continue operating under the old rule, as if you were still accumulating for a distant tomorrow. And this is precisely where a risk emerges that no financial simulation can fully capture. The real risk. Nobody calculates. If you open any retirement planning simulator, you'll see detailed projections, average annual return, adjusted inflation, market sequence, statistical life expectancy. Everything looks organized. You enter your retirement savings, estimate your Social Security, adjust your withdrawal rate, avoid technical retirement mistakes, and walk away with a probability of success percentage. It feels scientific, almost definitive. But there is a risk none of these spreadsheets can measure with precision. Spreadsheets measure money. They don't measure capacity. They don't measure energy. They don't measure the emotional readiness to enjoy what you've built. You may have done everything right in investing for retirement. You may have avoided 401k mistakes and followed the best retirement tips. Still, no chart can tell you when your mobility will decline, when your health will require more attention, or when your willingness to take on demanding travel will change. That risk is invisible, but real. Imagine 2 hypothetical scenarios. In the first, you maintain a conservative withdrawal rate for another 10 years, accumulating even more wealth. In the second, you use part of that capital now for meaningful experiences while your health remains stable. Financially, both scenarios may be sustainable, but only one recognizes time as the scarce resource. The other continues treating money as if it were still the primary constraint. There is a window that closes quietly. It doesn't send quarterly reports. It doesn't appear on investing for retirement dashboard. It's not discussed in conversations about Social Security or how to retire strategies. That window involves autonomy, mobility, clarity, and energy. Once it narrows, no additional amount in retirement savings restores what was lost. It's an asymmetric risk. You can lose a lot and recover very little. The point here isn't to abandon prudence or ignore retirement planning. It's to acknowledge that there's a category of risk that doesn't fit into traditional spreadsheets. If you continue measuring only what can be quantified, you may neglect what is truly irreplaceable. And this leads to a deeper conflict. Why does spending still feel wrong, even when you rationally understand all of this? Why spending feels morally wrong? There's something curious that is almost never discussed in retirement planning. Spending can feel wrong, even when it's financially safe. You spent decades being rewarded for saving, investing, avoiding retirement mistakes, and maintaining discipline. Every dollar saved reinforced your identity as responsible. Every prudent decision strengthened your path toward financial freedom. Over time, saving stopped being just a strategy. It became a moral virtue. Now notice what happens when you decide to use part of your retirement savings. Even if your plan is solid, even if Social Security covers your basic expenses, even if your withdrawal rate is within conservative limits, an internal discomfort arises. It's not a lack of money, it's guilt. It feels as if you're breaking an invisible rule that has guided you for 40 years. And this isn't about math, it's about identity. You were conditioned to believe that accumulating is prudent and spending is risky. That model was essential during the investing for retirement phase, especially if you aim to retire early or avoid relying solely on Social Security. But in the enjoyment phase, money changes function. It stops being a shield and becomes a tool. When that shift isn't internalized, you keep protecting the shield long after the battle has ended. Think about the difference between recklessness and purpose. Buying something impulsively is not the same as investing in meaningful experiences. A planned family trip, a renovation that improves your quality of life, a course that stimulates your mind, all of these can align perfectly with your retirement planning. Yet the automatic reaction may still be, I shouldn't touch that. That reflex doesn't come from the numbers. It comes from the story you told yourself for decades. And here's the quiet tension. The more disciplined you were throughout life, the harder it may be to redefine the role of money now. The discipline that brought you here can turn into rigidity if it's not reinterpreted. And that rigidity begins to produce an effect that few people openly admit, but many feel in silence. The retirement regret. Most people never admit. There's a regret that almost never surfaces in retirement planning conversations. You hear people say they wish they had started investing earlier, avoided 401k mistakes, followed better retirement tips. But there's another kind of regret, quieter, rarely spoken aloud. It has nothing to do with how much you accumulated. It has to do with how much you lived while you were accumulating, and after you finished accumulating. Imagine a 74-year-old man with a solid portfolio, stable Social Security, and retirement savings well above what he needs. He followed every principle of investing for retirement, studied how to retire early, avoided retirement mistakes with exemplary discipline. Financially, it's a success story. But when he looks back, he realizes he postponed trips, projects, and experiences while waiting for more security. He doesn't regret saving. He regrets waiting too long to use what he saved. You might ask, where is the line between prudence and excess? The answer isn't found in a fixed percentage or a retirement planning manual. It lies in the relationship between money and time. If you keep accumulating security beyond what you truly need, you may discover that the cost was invisible. It's not a cost that shows up on a statement. It's a cost that shows up in memory, in opportunities not taken, in experiences that could have been shared. It's striking how the human mind tends to overestimate financial risks and underestimate existential ones. You project pessimistic scenarios about markets, inflation, and potential Social Security changes, but you rarely project scenarios involving declining energy or limited health. In doing so, you prioritize avoiding technical retirement mistakes while overlooking errors of omission. And in many cases, what hurts at the end of life isn't what you did wrong. It's what you never did. This isn't a call for recklessness. It's an invitation to recalibrate priorities. Because when regret appears, it's rarely about missing an extra percentage point of return. It's about time that could have been used differently. And that recalibration leads to a question that changes the game entirely. Before we continue, try a simple test. If the market never went up another dollar, if your Social Security were exactly enough, And if you knew your money would never run out, what would still be stopping you from using more of it? Write this in the comments. What holds me back is tempo chia. No long explanation, no justification, because most of the time, the real fear isn't financial. And writing it down may be the first time you admit what it actually is. The shift that changes everything. For years, maybe decades, you've been asking the same question. Will I run out of money? That question guided your retirement planning, your investing for retirement decisions, your 401k contributions, your attention to retirement tips, and your constant effort to avoid retirement mistakes. It was useful. It functioned as a compass during the accumulation phase. But there's a quiet shift that must happen when your wealth is no longer fragile. The new question isn't financial, it's strategic. Instead of asking whether the money will run out, you begin asking, am I running out of time to use this money in a meaningful way? Notice the inversion. The first question protects the future. The second protects the present. The first is quantitative. The second is qualitative. Both matter, but in different phases of life. Imagine two decisions in front of you. In the first, you maintain an extremely conservative withdrawal rate, continuing to build even more retirement savings, even though Social Security already covers much of your basic expenses. In the second, you use part of your capital within a sustainable framework to fund experiences now, while your health and energy allow it. Financially, both can be justified, but only one recognizes that the scarce resource has changed. This shift in questioning doesn't mean abandoning discipline. It means adapting discipline to a new context. When you learn how to retire intelligently, you must also learn how to use money intelligently. The goal is no longer to maximize the balance on your statement. It's to maximize life value within the boundaries of your retirement planning. And that requires intellectual courage, the willingness to challenge a fear that has followed you for decades. When this mental switch flips, your relationship with money transforms. It stops being merely protection against the future and becomes a tool for building the present. And once you make that transition, an inevitable question emerges. One that doesn't appear in financial reports, yet has the power to completely reorganize your priority. The final question that stays with you. Imagine for a moment that you could sit down with the 70 or 75-year-old version of yourself. Not the idealized version, the real one, with natural limitations, different energy, and a clearer perspective on what truly mattered. That version wouldn't be worried about an extra 0.5% annual return in investing for retirement. It would likely have something else in mind. Perhaps that older version would say something simple. I was safer than I thought. Let that settle for a moment. You spent decades structuring your retirement planning, avoiding retirement mistakes, adjusting allocations to protect your retirement savings, and counting on Social Security as a stable foundation. And yet, you may have lived part of that time with a constant sense of threat. The question is, was that threat real? Or was it inherited from an older fear? Project yourself into the future. You reach age 80 with your portfolio intact, having avoided 401k mistakes, maintained discipline, and taken no significant risks. Financially, you were a model of prudence. But looking back, you realize you postponed meaningful decisions while waiting for more certainty. How would you evaluate that balance? Does the account balance compensate for experiences that never happened? That's a calculation no spreadsheet captures. The reflection that lingers isn't technical. It's not about which fund to choose or which how to retire strategy to follow. It's about alignment between resources and use. If you have enough money to ensure stability, the question shifts from how much can I preserve to how much should I live? That distinction may seem subtle, but it completely reshapes your trajectory. And this is the question that tends to echo in quiet moments. If your future self could give you one piece of advice today, what would it be? It might not be to save more. It might be to recalibrate what security truly means. And that recalibration changes how you see even the smallest decisions going forward.